Hello, my name is Mladen. Some of you may have seen my talks on the previous PGDay.IT. So, something about me. I work as a CTO of Smartivo. For the last year, I do everything. And we do fleet management. So if you have vehicles, you can talk with me later. All the slides are already online. So if you have written the link, you can download it, so you don't have to take pictures, stop me, or something like that. I have a blog that I don't have time to write. And it seems that I'm not the only one. In spare time, I do some consultancies with these guys. And they mainly do some predictions from Facebook surveys. So this is the last big project that we worked on. It's predictions for the French elections. And the predictions were quite good, as expected. But the last year we had predictions for the US elections, and that were unfortunately correct. So, a small disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer, so this is how I see the General Data Protection Regulation. And as you might know, it's really big stuff. So I have it here. It's 100 pages. I've read it 3 or 4 times yet. And every time I read it, I found something new. I read a lot of additional stuff on the internet, official, unofficial blogs, and something like that. And I have problems with that. So, does anyone know what General Data Protection Regulation is? Have you done some research? Can you raise your hand? Oh, so less than 10. Well, you have some catching up to do. So, this is just a short list of topics that I'll be covering, so we can start. So the General Data Protection Regulation is, as they say, the most important change in privacy regulation in the last 20 years, because the last one was in 95, and a lot of things changed since 95 in computer science, and you know. So, it's all about personal data. Mine, yours, your clients, and other employees. And private people also. So, I say everybody is affected. Everyone that has some software that stores what they call personal data will be affected by this. So, let me get a step back. Why is this regulation in place? And it's not in place yet. It will be on May 25th next year, but it's then after they rule it, they said you have 2 years to get compliant. So a year and a half already passed. So the problem is data collection is now happening on an unprecedented scale. So they collect everything. And a month ago, I got a link from my colleague of mine and said, yo, they can identify you by your browser fingerprint. So you can go to this link and see some percentages of how precisely they think that they can identify you without cookies, without any data provided from you, except from data from your browser. The other stuff, being a CTO, I get some pitches from people over LinkedIn, and they say, you know, we have a software. You can put this snippet on your website, and we can tell you everything about people visiting it, including their phone number, company, and where they work. So you can contact them directly and sell your product. Is this scary? So, let me talk about the definition of personal data. So this is copied from the regulation, and if you read it carefully, you see this is actually everything. So any piece of information that you have that you can combine with another piece of information that could specifically identify an individual, it's called personal data, including wish lists on a site, your playlist, list of transactions, your locations, where you live, maybe where you access internet. So, there are certain parts of the General Data Protection Regulation that are more stressed. This one, I will explain each one. So we can divide it in two parts, depending on who is more affected. So you have something that the collector is affected more. You have the data subject, so the person, it's called subject for I don't know which concrete reason, and something that affects mostly in the same way both of them. So, the increased territorial scope of the General Data Protection Regulation is a change from the last directive, because if your company is storing any information, personal information, about European residents. So you don't have to be a citizen, you just have to be in the EU at that point of the collection of time, that point of time when the collection happens. So, and it is applied even if you do not require any payment or stuff, only for marketing. So this tells you that everybody from, especially here, will be affected. So, if you are not in the EU, you may have to appoint a representative so that EU bodies could reach you and EU residents. So, this is actually the most important part, because nobody cares if there are no fines. So, there are two tiers of fines declared in the General Data Protection Regulations. The light one, so 2% of your annual global turnover, or for the last fiscal year, or 10 million euros, or double of that. So, this is not a small number, especially for smaller companies. The problem is, this is the maximum fine, and they will take the bigger number to fine you, or the percentage of the 20 million euros. So, another stuff that is new in the General Data Protection Regulation is the so-called unambiguous consent. So you have to know and say, yes, I want my data to be collected for that and that purpose. You remember cookies a few years ago. So this is just another level above that. And you are not allowed to have the box pre-checked and to say if you, paraphrase it, you have to require action from the user. It's not with small words at the bottom of the page hidden somewhere. This has to be very, very specific, and it has to allow the private person to take back the consent. So, you can revoke it, and it should be as easy as to give it. So, you do not have to have consent to collect data. you can collect data on any other legal ground. A contract, your country obliges you to because of some law or something else. There's plenty of text in the regulation about this. Mostly, usual web services like Facebook or something else, they will require consent from you because they do not have any other legal ground for that. So, interesting stuff. If there is a data breach, you have to be notified within 72 hours. So you know that something happened to your private data. There's a catch. The timing starts when the breach is detected. And also, if you have additional measures to safeguard the data, you don't have to notify. Because you say, oh, they stole the data, but the data is encrypted, so they cannot read it. So you can say, okay, I'm secure. Other stuff, the right to access. So if somebody is collecting your data, you have the right to ask him and request the data so you can see it and correct if there are mistakes. So, and this is usually not for regular social media websites, but let's say your tax returns or something like that, and you can see that the data there is not okay. You're entitled to have some corrections in, I don't know, since few days. The timing depends on the data. So you can get a copy of it, but only for the data that you have given to the controller directly. So somebody can acquire the data of you from a third party. It depends. It usually says government agencies can have different databases that they can collect different aspects of your life. So, but you can have some insight of some of that data. So, the other stuff is data portability. The regulation says if somebody has your data, they have to provide a way to export it in a machine-readable format, so you can take it and to another controller. Let's say you are migrating from Facebook to somebody else. You want all your posts, all your pictures, all your tags exported and imported to somewhere else in a machine-readable format. The other stuff is privacy by design. It says that you have to design your system to be in line with the regulation. And that's a problem because most systems are alive way, way longer before this regulation. And it will be very interesting to see at spring next year how will this be checked. So usually it's about security, encryption, anonymization, and other stuff. So you remember the big data boom. So as I said before, we are collecting everything because there's no reason not to. Storage is very, very cheap, so you collect everything. And then, if you want to, you can do some analysis on that. The GDPR actually says, well, you have to know what you want to collect before you start collecting it, because you have to tell it to the person, and you need to have consent or other legal grounds to do so. Also, when the data when you don't need the data anymore, you have to delete it. You do not have to. You can't store it forever. So this transforms the big data model into some kind of medium data. And the subject, the person, company that you're working with, has to be informed about all of this. So a big point in the GDPR is data transparency. So nothing would happen with your data that you are not allowed to. So an additional stuff for transparency and for security is the data protection officer. So every major company that processes data on a large scale or government agencies that collect data will have to appoint a data protection officer. And other companies that are smaller usually do not need to, but they may want to have one just for security. It does not have to be a staff member. It can be outsourced. The main problem is usually people think, okay, we have some IT guy and we'll make him data protection officer. But unfortunately, IT guys are in a conflict of interest here because they are designing the data, the system, and there's a requirement for no conflict of interest. And it has to report to the highest levels of management. Also, it has to have enough power to drive change in your company. Because if he says that's not good, it has to be fixed. Also, it has to be qualified, and this is something that is debatable, qualified depending on the job that the company does. So the more data you store, the more qualified it should be. It should have some knowledge about security, data protection, legal matters about this. You're never sure if he has to be a lawyer or some kind of degree like that. It's not written very well. So there's just one more missing, but I want to show you the structure. So the data, the GDPR knows a controller and a processor. So when reading this in English, I had a mental problem of devising which one is what and why. So I've read the Croatian translation, and it's a little bit better because this is management, and this is just some guy working, an employee. These controller and processor are different legal entities. So your company uses another company for processing the data. And they all have this supervising authority per country. And they might want to have DPO and have business with the data subject, directly or indirectly. So, after you've done your homework reading the GDPR, you should know if you are the collector or the processor. Because this is very important for you. Because if something happens bad, this guy is the first to fall. So you maybe want to be this one. No, he can have legal consequences, but the most stuff that is prescribed that somebody has to do something is this guy here. So the last part that it's most bothering to me is this, the right to be forgotten. So the problem with the right to be forgotten, it's that it requires you to delete all the data of your subject if he asks you to, or he rescinds his consent from everywhere. After reading that, I remembered a movie from 20 years ago and a scene when this guy goes crazy. If you're Italian, you maybe know it. This is an animation on that theme. So, anybody remembers the movie? L'occhio della madre. Okay, so if you get back to the list of topics from before, we can divide them by organizational measures or technical ones. I'll be mostly talking about technical measures because there's stuff that you can do in Postgres. This one you cannot do in Postgres. So, we asked our friend the elephant to help us in some points. So, let's just start with the right to erasure, also called the right to be forgotten. So, when the data is no longer necessary for the purpose it was collected, or the subject rescinds his consent, you have to delete it. So, if the data usually expires after some time, you can use partitions and delete the old partitions at some regular basis. In my case, it's after 2 years. So it's quite better than delete from, because no more actions are needed after that, because there are no dead rows. If somebody rescinds his consent in the meantime, then when you have to delete it manually. So, what about backups? Everybody has backups. Do you have logs for debugging or stuff? So, there's nothing said specifically about backups or log in the regulation. It just says delete data from everywhere. So, there are no guidelines yet also. So if you ask some consultants, they said, yes, you have to delete it from backups. I will help you. It will cost you this much. And there's a clear conflict of interest there because they want to charge their time, and this is not sure. So if you said your backup is a snapshot of a point in time, it's unnatural to require deletion of such data. Also, it might not be possible. So if you use binary incremental backups, you cannot delete data from the snapshot because all the incremental files would not work. It would just collapse. So let's see this bad scenario. So for logs, you try not to log private data. Or if you have to, you encrypt it, you hash it so that it cannot be used for that. And you delete the logs as soon as you don't need it anymore. As for backups, it depends how you store your data in the database. So if you know, Postgres actually runs as a cluster. It's said cluster, but it's one computer process called cluster. So you have more databases in that cluster, and in each database you can have different data. So depending on your situation, you can have all data in one place, one database per cluster, or one database per customer in one cluster. So if you have one cluster per customer, then it's easy. You just delete everything. Okay. But the problem is, if you have this configuration, you have a lot of wasted resources, especially memory. Because every process, every cluster has its configuration to work properly. It has to have at least a minimum amount of memory. It cannot share it with the other clusters. So, and if the configurations are not the same, you're in configuration hell. So, if you have one database per cluster, you cannot use binary backups. You cannot use logical ones. So the regular PG dump. So in that situation, you just delete all those dumps. Unfortunately, you cannot have point-in-time recovery in that. And also, you are wasting resources on multiple connections. So if you want to have at least one connection open in a pool for each database, that's a lot of databases. And usually you want to have more than one. So, and if each connection is requiring some memory and some other file system limits also, so you're wasting resources again. PG Bouncer might help you, but unfortunately by not that much. So if you have all the data in one database, then you have to take a different approach. You can use per-user encryption, and be sure that the encryption key is not in the database. The main one, the key encryption key, if you have had experiences with encryption systems, zones, and stuff like that. So the main key must not be in the database. You might want to have one key per row, or one key per customer per row, or different analogies. So when you delete the keys, the data is just random bits, because you cannot retrieve it anymore. That's the point of encryption. It does not distinguish itself from random bits. The problem with the regular delete, it just marks the row as deleted. So if you stop the database after a delete, you can still retrieve the data if you want to. Or if you do not run vacuum, if you have a small database. So now you have to ensure the keys are secure, but that's another talk for key management. Also, it would be good to have two sets of keys, one for you and one for the client. So if somebody loses his key, the other one can help and not lose his data forever. Remember that. So this is the best that you can do without tampering with backups. And tampering with backups, I think it's not feasible. It will be a lot more to do programming with Postgres and backup systems to achieve something like that you can delete the data from the past, from the snapshots. So a better scenario that it might be in practice is that you provide a procedure for deleting the data after you restore it, if you ever restore it. So this is a half technical, half organizational measures. Usually, with those kind of regulations, you have to produce a lot of paperwork, like ISO certifications and so. So you have an organizational measures that says, okay, the data for me is as deleted as it can be. I cannot delete it from the backups, but I will not use it. I will delete it as in the scope of restoring the data. So the post-restoration hook scripts or something like that. So that was the tough part. The right to portability actually is very easy. So if asked to, you have to export the data in a structured format. If you read the guidelines that are available on the web, you say you should use industry standards for export, or if there are no standards, use regular standards, like these three. And it's a good thing, Postgres has them all inside. So you can make a query or export directly a table in this format without any additional software. So, for security of processing, this is a large article. Article 32 has 3 pages. So you should use pseudonymization and encryption for your data. So there is an extension to Postgres called PGCrypto. It has almost all hashing functions that you will need and all encryption algorithms. Additionally, you should ensure the confidentiality, integrity, availability, resilience, and all the systems. So when you connect to the database, you may force only SSL TLS connections. You may use certificates instead of passwords. And you can use replicas. So if one server goes down, you have the other one. Also backups. So you should have the ability to restore the availability to access the data in case of a system failure. So you have already replicas ready, but a replica is not a backup. So if you drop database or drop table, it will get replicated. So you do not have a backup. So use PG Barman. You have been on the talk. And you can have your own backup scripts, as I do, But the problem is it's very painful to maintain them, because there are changes between Postgres versions, there are bugs that you haven't found yet when you start testing them, and when you need them in production. So let me say, rolling your own backup scripts is the new rolling your own crypto. So another stuff, you should be testing your system on a regular basis. So at least for the backup and testing your backups, you can use PG Barman. You have seen the talk from Gabriele before. It's almost like a click on the mouse. You said this server restore post hook script to do it automatically, so you have your backups tested. And you should do it regularly. I haven't, and fortunately I haven't got any problems in restoring 2 terabytes of data, and that would be very problematic stuff if you have to. So for additional security measures, you can audit the changes. So there's these PG audit extensions that you can use, or to log all historical changes in the tables to see all the previous versions. Also, you can try to restrict data access to users if you use views and store procedures and then grant them access. There are row security policies from a few versions ago. So you can have one user, database user as a regular user, and then switch your connection user using this extension. So you can enforce specific user afterwards. So you use a connection pooler to recycle connections and then switch user later. So after all of this, and the elephant has helped you a little bit, you might just have fortune not to fall down. So, 92 minuti di applausi. So your chariot now is stable enough so you can survive this. So let's have a summary. The elephant can help you with some problems, technical ones. It's up to you to do the rest. So you may have to appoint a DPO, do an impact assessment if needed, write all the procedures, and implement all the information on your site so your customers can see this, because it has to be visible. It surely be helpful in the case of an investigation or an audit. Hire a consultant if you can. It would probably be cheaper than the penalties, but maybe you could try to wait a little bit more to see if there will be any more guidelines published, because currently there's only 3 of them for the DPO, from the impact assessment, and I can't remember the third, but no backups. They're not mentioned anywhere. Questions?
Nobody?
We all have logs, and we all have, I think we have personal data in logs. What is a personal data or a private data as stated by GDPR? Maybe if I have a MAC
Examples.
address.
A MAC address is personal data as an IP address as your location. You can write the guidelines, it's stated at least for the IP address, but the MAC address should be unique, at least enough unique for that. More guidelines are needed and more information to the public, especially people doing systems. More questions?
Another question? Okay, so I think it's enough. Thank you, Mladen.
Thank you.